Hey guys, Taki here. After the popularity of the Miyoo Mini launch last year, a lot of companies have been trying to get a foothold in this mini device craze. The Miyoo Mini ended up being a killer device for the price with a ton of color options, good third-party support for software, and a ton of mods from people in the community. The Miyoo Mini is still a great device, but the problem with its popularity is that it's very hard to get a hold of if you weren't lucky enough to get it during the initial launch window. That is where the RG35XX comes in, and a lot of people were hoping that this would be a good enough option to serve as a recommendation to those that still want a smaller device, but don't want to hunt for random AliExpress drops. In this video, we're going to do a first look on this new device to get a rough idea of how it stacks up to the current mini handheld champ. I want to point out that unlike a lot of videos that you're going to see on this device this week, this was not a free unit for me. I bought this thing with my own money, and if it ends up being crap, I'm going to have no problem telling you. If you end up liking this video and you want to support reviews like this, consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. Let's get some of the easier stuff out of the way with a rundown on what this thing offers under the hood. The RG35XX is packaged with a processor from a company that we don't usually see in handhelds that people care all that much about. This thing is a pretty old processor from a Chinese company called Action Semiconductor. If you haven't heard of them before, these guys used to have their chips in millions of MP3 and MP4 devices back in the day, and this processor is one of their older ones from around 2014. Unlike the Miyoo Mini, the good thing about this guy is that it has a 3D GPU from Imaginations, and it can run Android. The software on this seems to be based on some closed-source Linux build, but it should be possible for this guy to run Android 4.2 in the future. Whether you'd want to do that with only 256 megabytes of RAM is another question, but at least the possibility is there. Our screen is probably our next most important feature on this guy, and it seems to be the same panel used in the RG353V at first glance. It's a 4:3 screen, which is the aspect ratio that you'd hope to see on something like this, and it seems to have a decent maximum and minimum brightness level out of the box. When we switch over to controls, we are presented almost entirely with an RG353V that does not have analog sticks. Even though this chip could potentially play games that could use an analog stick, I don't think it's a bad thing that they omitted it. The current layout works in the same way as the Miyoo Mini, and it helps to make this a device that you can just carry around in your pocket. So on the front, we have a D-pad and a set of 4 input buttons with a menu key in the middle and a pair of start and select buttons below that. On the side, we have our volume keys, and on the right, we have a reset button and our power button. I want to point out that this button does have sleep functionality, which is another positive for the pick up and play nature of this thing. The D-pad here is pretty much par for the course with Anbernic devices, and it should be good enough for anyone that likes conductive rubber D-pads. It's a little smaller than some of the normal Anbernic handhelds, but not enough that you won't feel right at home here if you own them. The face buttons are also good with a satisfying retro feeling membrane. The back is where things are not as good as I would have liked. When you have these Game Boy Pocket style devices, it's kind of hard to design a set of shoulder buttons that work well, and I don't think these are as good as they could have been with a bit more polish. The main issue that I have with these is that the R2 and L2 buttons are not differentiated enough from the other two buttons to make it easy to press one over the other when you want. The 351V went with a different approach that also wasn't perfect, but I think it was very easy to know which button you were pressing, and the shelf wasn't that bad for resting your fingers. In this kind of style, I think the Miyoo Mini layout is a better solution. I also think the rubber switches that Miyoo uses are a bit better than the ones used in this new device. On the front of the device, we have a mono speaker, which is fine for something at this price point. I still need to spend some more time with this to get a feel for its strengths and weaknesses, but I did want to do a side-by-side comparison against the Miyoo Mini for a bit of context. For this test, we will use one of my favorite SNES games, and we will start first with the Miyoo Mini. If you are watching this on a phone, it might be a good time to grab a set of headphones so you can help to hear the differences. Here's the Miyoo Mini. Now let's check out the 35XX. Again, I still need to see how this guy holds up in different scenarios, but you can feel free to leave a comment down below about which device sounded better to you. So far, we've mentioned a few things that are decent on this device, but we all know that these things live and die by their software, And I'm a little apprehensive going into the software on this device because of how prevalent these actions processors are in bad PSP and Vita clone devices. We also know that Anbernic is far from being the best at creating stock firmware for these devices, but I am hoping that this can at least hold a candle to the initial builds that went out with the Miyoo Mini. I don't think that that is a high bar to hit. Right off the bat, we're greeted with the standard MP4 handheld UI that we usually find in these devices. We've got the main row of bubble icons, and we have that familiar activity sound that seems to be in all of these devices. If we punch into Game Rooms, we have a list of systems that are supported on this device with some icons for the systems and some icons for the included ROMs that came with the unit. So far, this is similar to the stock Miyoo experience. Let's head into a system that is natively 4x3 to take a look at some of the options that we have once we are in a game. Once the game is booted, a single press of the menu key opens up our context menu, and we don't have a lot here. This is far less than I was expecting to find on this device because a lot of the smaller and older devices had fairly robust options. We can save our game, load our game, add a filter, change the screen brightness, mess with the BIOS, and enable vibration. We don't seem to have any options here for scaling. This isn't an issue for the game that I'm playing right now, but it might be as we continue. It is interesting that we do not have an option to show FPS because that is something that exists on other MP4 style handhelds. That also means that we will need to judge our performance a little closer to see if this thing is performing as we would expect. The first thing that I want to test for is screen tearing because that's a huge problem on the sub $50 handhelds that this thing is hoping to replace. Let's boot up our test game, and as long as we don't see tearing, this screen should be properly configured and should have the ability to refresh at 60 Hz even if we aren't able to see the FPS meter. Let's check on a system that is not 4x3 and see if we have a scaling option there. So here we are in a normal Game Boy game, and you can see the entire thing is full screen. On the Miyoo Mini, I don't really mind having the games go full screen like this because the panel is much smaller, but this 3.5-inch screen isn't that small, so it would have been nice to get some proper scaling options going on here. The underlying tech on this device shouldn't have any issue doing real scaling, so I'm not sure why they didn't implement it in this software. Well, I do know why, but that's another story. Let's move over to the main settings window to see if there are any other interesting options on this before we look at performance. In the settings menu, we have a bunch of options, but it seems like the main ones are going to be disabling that annoying button sound and changing up our themes. A lot of these theme options are pretty crap right now, but this should be one of the easier things for us to replace down the line, as this doesn't require that much effort to swap out. I will say that it is nice to at least have the option of changing these without being stuck with one. We can also change out our background picture, but these are also not great. So that's where we are unfortunately going to leave the software side of things at this point. Now let's take a look at the performance of this system. To do this, we are going to test a few games from most of the systems that this thing supports so you can get an idea of what you can expect. We are going to start at the top of our list and work our way down. Our first system is PS1, and I have the sound routed from the headphone jack into the camera so you can listen for any potential slowdowns. I am noticing that this processor is heating up in the back, which is something that I expected to find with a processor that is this old. This is probably one of the only systems on this device so far that could potentially use our GPU, so we are probably getting hit on both ends with this. As with other devices from this company, I am only concerned if they're using the battery as a heatsink, but that doesn't seem like that is the case. Our next system is listed as Vertical Arcade Games. From here, let's take a look at CPS titles and Neo Geo. I want to jump over to handheld systems for a bit, and we're going to start off with Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Now let's look at some Game Gear. GBA is a system that usually struggles on Action's handhelds, but it seems to be fine on this one. The only con is obviously our lack of scaling options, but it is nice to see it running at full speed. Let's round out this performance section with some of our remaining console options. Here's NES. Now we have Super Nintendo. For this, I'm going to start with some of the more demanding games from this system that usually do not run full speed on cheap handhelds. Based on my experience with these titles, it seems to be holding up well, but I'm not sure what emulator they are using without trying to look for some known bugs or issues. If I had to guess, we are probably not using something modern. And finally, let's check out Sega Master System and Genesis. These are all 4x3 systems that run well on cheap handhelds, but this total package is arguably better in some meaningful ways. Before going over my closing thoughts on this first look, I want to do a teardown to check out the battery situation due to the heat that I experienced while testing PS1. This thing is easy to take apart if you have the correct tools, and it seems like they have this battery slightly off the processor area. The heat might still build up in this pocket here, but it shouldn't be nearly as bad as some of the older Anbernic handhelds. Let's wrap up this first look video with some of my closing thoughts. Obviously, this device is Anbernic's attempt to cash in on the success of the Miyoo Mini and to provide a device that should be easier to obtain. I think they probably could have done a better job than this with some other processor choices that they could have gone with, but this isn't that far from the mark. The screen is decent enough, and I think this is a much better option from a performance standpoint than older Anbernic devices have been at this price point in the past. You are getting decent build quality with this, and you are getting a control feeling that is comparable to other devices that this company sells. One of the biggest things going against this product is the current software, and I have to believe the company knows this isn't as good of an experience as other stuff they sell. It's also a closed source device, which is something that people didn't want to see, but a lot of the Miyoo Mini is as well. I'm not really sure why this is the case given the age of this processor, as I don't think many companies would be rushing out the door to try and clone this when there are much better processors out there for the price, but that's where we are. Unlike other people in this space, I don't tend to do wishful thinking reviews on devices with the idea that you should buy something now and wait for it to get better as people in the community improve the stock experience, so I can only judge how it is right now. It very well may be the case that this thing gets better than it is right now as some people like Steward or others crack it open, but that's not the current situation. In its current form, this thing doesn't offer nearly as much as the Miyoo Mini or even cheaper handhelds that this thing is hoping to replace from a configuration standpoint. For someone like me, there are better options out there that have a lot that can be customized, but they are also a bit more expensive than this is. I paid around $40 with shipping included for the unit that I have here, and I think it was worth that much given how cheap all of the components are that went into this. This thing is dirt cheap to produce, and $40 is well within my acceptable range for what this should cost. Now, there are ways for this price to shoot up way higher than this, given that they are selling a package with a 128GB SD card filled with ROMs for an additional $15, but I'm just going to ignore that one because the cost for this starts to get stupid once you factor in shipping prices. Even if you only want to stick with Anbernic handhelds, there are better deals to be had. Around $50 to $55 shipped makes a lot more sense for this given the current state of the software, but the company can give this more value with the right mix of new features. The ball is in their court. When it comes down to who this is for, I think this could be a decent gift this holiday season to someone that doesn't care that much about having access to scaling options or any other features that you'd expect from handhelds that I review. If you are someone that needs to have those things, I would say to just sit this one out for a while and watch to see what happens. There is no point to invest in this thing now if you aren't happy with what I just showed. The price isn't going to change that much from where it is right now, and if anything, this will be much cheaper in the future when and if software improvements come out. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the RG35XX. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this showcase, and I hope you found this video informative. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.